Welcome to Aeonkeep, where the ancient legends live. There is a valley in the northeast of the Peloponnese, where the land folds in on itself and the light does not quite reach the way it should. The people of Nemea knew something lived there. They had known it for years, not from seeing it, but from what they found after. Cattle reduced to fragments across half a mile of broken ground. Whole flocks simply gone, replaced by silence and the smell of something that had no name in the vocabulary of ordinary life. Shepherds who ventured too close to the low hills above the valley did not come back. The farmers of the region had abandoned their fields in a widening circle around a presence they would not speak of directly, because to name it was to invite it nearer. They called it the lion. The word was inadequate. They had no better one. This is where Eurystheus sent Hercules first. Understand what Eurystheus was. Not a villain in any grand sense. That word implies a scale he did not possess. He was a frightened man in a large chair, made king by divine manipulation at the moment of birth, who now sat across from the consequence of that manipulation and felt the particular terror of someone who has been given power he does not know how to use against something he cannot begin to measure. Hercules had arrived at Tiryns and presented himself without ceremony. No defiance, no performance of the humiliation involved. He had come from Delphi with the oracle's sentence in him, and the weight of everything he had lost still fresh, and he had walked through the gate and stood before the king whose throne should have been his, and said simply, "I am here." Eurystheus had not designed the monsters of the Greek world. He had simply looked at what already existed, the creatures already moving through the landscape, the dangers already pulling people away from their fields and their flocks, and pointed at the worst of them. The Nemean Lion was understood to be the offspring of Typhon and Echidna, the great serpent father and the half-woman, half-serpent mother of monsters, whose children were the horror catalogue of the Greek imagination. Its hide was impervious. No blade, no spear, no arrow, no weapon forged by mortal hands could pierce it. Eurystheus had done his research. A thing that cannot be cut or pierced cannot be killed by conventional means. He sent Hercules to face it with the private conviction, carefully suppressed, that he was sending him to die. Hercules went to Nemea. He found the valley and the silence that had settled over it like ash, the absence of animals, of birds, of ordinary sound. He found the caves above the valley floor, two-mouthed, the kind of place a creature returns to after it has eaten. He found the bones. He found the scale of what the bones described and spent some time with that information before proceeding. He set up camp. He waited. He tested methodically what he had been told, arrows that struck the lion's flank and fell away as if they had struck iron, which was the moment the full situation resolved into clarity. There was no edge that could help him here, no distance he could put between himself and the creature and still accomplish anything. The lion could only be taken with his hands. He drove it into the cave. He blocked one entrance with a felled tree, went through the other, and in the darkness inside, no space for range, no space for tools, no space for anything except two bodies in direct contact. He got his arms around the animal and applied the same force he had first used in a cradle in Thebes. The lion died. He stood in the cave entrance holding it, breathing steadily, and considered what to do next. He wanted the hide, but he had already established that no blade could cut it. He spent time on this problem with the pragmatic patience of a man who has just strangled something in a cave and is in no particular hurry. The answer was direct. If only the lion's own claws were sharp enough to pierce the lion's own hide, then he would use the lion's own claws to skin it. He emerged from the Nemean valley carrying a lion's skin across his shoulders. The hide became his armour. This detail, which appears across every major source tradition, carries more weight than it might first seem. Hercules does not simply kill the Nemean lion, he becomes it, in the way a warrior becomes the thing he has overcome. The impenetrable hide that was sent to kill him became the thing that would protect him from everything else. The instrument of an intended death repurposed as a kind of permanent victory. For the rest of his life, in every image the ancient world ever made of him, the lion's skin is there, the visual shorthand for a man who took what was designed to destroy him and wore it instead. He returned to Tiryns with the lion across his back. Eurystheus, seeing him approach through the city gates, did not wait to receive him. The sight of Hercules, alive, moving with complete composure, draped in the hide of the thing that had emptied an entire valley of life, produced in the king of Tiryns a response he would never quite recover from. He had a large bronze storage jar buried in the earth of his palace courtyard, and he climbed inside it, and he issued his subsequent instructions to Hercules through intermediaries. From that point forward, he would not receive the hero directly. He could not make himself do it. This is not incidental mythological detail. It is the entire relationship between these two men compressed into a single image. Eurystheus underground, Hercules standing above in the daylight, wearing the hide of an impossible animal and waiting to hear what comes next with the patience of someone who has run out of things that can frighten him. The second labour came by messenger, the Lernaean Hydra. The marshes of Lerna, on the eastern coast of the Peloponnese, are the entrance to the underworld according to some ancient traditions, a place where the earth thins and what lives below can push upward. The Hydra lived in those marshes, coiled around a spring called Amymone, and it was understood to be something the world had not produced by ordinary means. 9 heads, by the most common accounting. Breath so poisonous that whatever it exhaled in the darkness killed the men who simply passed near the water's edge. The Hydra was Typhon and Echidna's offspring again, the same lineage as the Nemean Lion, the same genealogy of deliberate horror. But the Hydra had a quality the lion had not. When a head was removed, 2 grew back in its place. Hercules drove his chariot to the edge of the Lernaean marshes with his nephew Iolaus. The detail of Iolaus matters. The young man who had come with him, who would understand his role in what followed, who was present not as a fighter, but as the other half of a problem that could not be solved alone. He drove the Hydra from its nest with burning arrows launched across the swamp. When the creature emerged, he waded in, and here the first approach failed. He cut. Each severed neck produced 2 heads in the wound's place, growing back with the mindless multiplication of something designed not to be diminished by ordinary means. The more he struck, the more there was. And something else. A great crab sent, some traditions say, by Hera herself, moving through the shallows to take Hercules' foot at the heel, while the Hydra's remaining heads pressed inward from above. He killed the crab. He crushed it without ceremony, which is the way you handle a distraction when you are in the middle of something that requires your full attention. And then he stopped swinging. In the shallows of Lerna, Hercules understood the trap of the Hydra. It was not unconquerable because it was powerful. It was unconquerable because it regenerated. Every strike was feeding the problem. The wound itself had to be closed. He called to Iolaus. He cut. Iolaus followed with a burning torch, pressing the flame to each neck as it fell, sealing the stump before growth could begin. No wound left open, no gap for multiplication. They worked through the Hydra this way, each head taken, each severed neck immediately cauterized, until what was left was the final head. The central one, which ancient sources describe as immortal, a head that could not be permanently killed even by fire. He buried it under a boulder, still alive, beside the road to Elias. Then he opened the creature's body and dipped his arrows in the Hydra's blood, which was among the most potent poisons the ancient world contained. Every arrow he would fire for the rest of his life would carry that poison. The weapons he needed for the labors to come were, in part, made from the second labor, Hercules' harvesting capability from each impossible thing he survived. Eurystheus, receiving word of the Hydra's defeat, refused to count it. Hercules had not been alone. Iolaus had helped. The labor was invalid. A replacement would be assigned. The decision of a frightened man desperate for any foothold he could find, against the sliding certainty that this was not going to end the way he had intended. He was not measuring Hercules. He was looking for any rule, any technicality, any procedural ground on which to stand. The third labor was unlike anything that had come before. The Lernaean hind was sacred to Artemis, goddess of the hunt, a creature of extraordinary beauty. Some traditions describe it as having golden antlers, which is a detail almost too mythologically strange to hold in the mind as an image. A deer with gold where bone should be, moving through the forests of Arcadia with the particular unhurried certainty of something that has never been hunted, because nothing in the natural world would dare. Its hooves were bronze. It moved faster than anything Hercules had ever pursued. Eurystheus wanted it captured alive and returned undamaged, not killed, taken. And the deepest layer of the task's design lay in that second constraint. The hind was sacred to Artemis, who was not a goddess of forgiving nature when her sacred animals were touched without permission. To harm the hind was to invite divine retribution from a deity whose precision with a bow was the benchmark against which all other archers were measured. To fail to take it was to fail the labor. Hercules pursued the hind for a full year. Let that settle. 12 months of sustained pursuit across the breadth of the known world, Arcadia and Istria and the land of the Hyperboreans, according to different accounts, each name a point on a map that stretched further from home than most mortal men travelled in a lifetime. He could not tire it out. It was faster than any creature he had encountered. He could not trap it by conventional means. The geography of the pursuit is mythological, meaning it is as much internal as physical. The map describes the extent of what this labour required, the will it asked of him to continue through seasons and across the boundaries of the familiar world without resolution. At last, after the year had turned, he cornered it as it crossed the river Ladon. Exhausted, out of options, he drew his bow. He did not shoot to kill. He shot to pin, the arrow piercing the bronze hooves, stopping the creature without taking its life. He lifted the wounded, sacred animal onto his shoulders. That is when Artemis arrived. She stood before him with Apollo beside her, the twin divine hunters, children of Zeus, looking at the blood on her sacred beast, and demanded to know what right he had to strike what belonged to her. He told her the truth. The Oracle of Delphi had given him this task. He had not intended to harm the animal. He had pursued it for a year by every other means available before the arrow. He intended to present it alive to Eurystheus and, the errand complete, return it to her service. There is something the sources preserve here without much comment, as if it were simply what happened. Hercules faces a goddess, not from a position of power, the wounded animal on his shoulders, the arrow his own, and makes his case with honesty and without embellishment, and the goddess accepts it. Artemis lets him go. The full force of divine anger, which could have ended the entire labour and the man completing it, is met with nothing except a direct account of necessity and a promise kept in advance. The hind is returned to her afterward, as he said it would be. The wound healed, the promise honoured. He returned to Tiryns. He presented the hind alive to Eurystheus, the requirement of the labour fully met. And then he released it back to the wild hills and Artemis's keeping, exactly as he had sworn. Eurystheus had his confirmation. He had nothing he could hold. 3 labours, 3 returns. Eurystheus turned the arithmetic over in his mind with increasing desperation. He had sent Hercules to the most dangerous creature in the Peloponnese, to a regenerating monster in a poisoned marsh, and then across the entire known world for a year after an animal sacred to a goddess who might have ended the whole problem herself. He had tried the straightforward approach, the thing that cannot be pierced, and the indirect approach, the thing that cannot be killed, and the trap approach, the thing you cannot touch without divine punishment finding you. All 3 had returned alive and standing. What he was trying to process was not merely that Hercules was strong enough or clever enough. It was something more unsettling. The labours were designed around the outer limits of what any being made of flesh and blood and will could survive. And Hercules was simply not contained by those limits. Not because he was invincible. He had needed Aeolus at the Hydra. He had needed a year of pursuit and an honest reckoning with a goddess at the hind. He was not immune to difficulty. He was immune to defeat. The distinction from where Eurystheus sat had a particular quality of horror. The ancient Greeks understood what they were exploring through these first 3 labors with a precision that rewards attention. They are not arbitrary monsters. The Nemean Lion is brute, impossible force, overcome by refusing to fight it on its own terms, by getting close enough to make all other tools irrelevant. The Lernaean Hydra is a problem that gets worse every time you attempt to solve it the obvious way. Overcome only when you change what you're doing at the moment the wound is still open. The Ceremonian Hind is the task that cannot be taken by force at all, overcome by patience, by sustained will across a full year, and finally by honesty before authority that held every advantage. 3 different problems requiring 3 genuinely different qualities: strength, intelligence, endurance, and integrity. The Greeks were not telling stories about a man who was stronger than everyone else. They were building one labor at a time, a picture of a human being who carried every quality simultaneously, not as a list of traits, but as a living, tested reality. Each impossible task was a question about what it actually means to be capable, and Hercules kept answering. There were 9 labors still waiting. Eurystheus would find worse things to send him toward, creatures at the edges of the world, tasks that would require him to leave the known earth entirely, and at the last of them, a descent into the kingdom of the dead itself. But 3 tasks had already told the essential truth about the man completing them. Whatever came next would encounter the same answer, not invincibility, but something harder to plan against: a man who does not stop. The lion's skin still hung across his shoulders. It would be there when he left Tiryns for the 4th time, and the 5th, and all the times that followed. The hide of the first impossible thing, worn as a permanent reminder that what is designed to kill you can also be the thing that keeps you alive. He was not finished. He had barely begun. This legend has been told. Subscribe and return to Aeonkeep. More legends await.